Owain Yeoman and Tim Kang aren't real cops, but they're
TV police!
the TV police.
Carnelian! How you doing?
Good. How does that have anything to do with Carnelian? You showing the mug thing?
Well, I'm glad you referenced that. I wanted to put the big quench, the super big quench, the big boy quench, right up there in the.
There's no logo. There's no. You're not. Where? What is it?
You're right. There isn't. I was just.
It says big on it. How does that?
Well, it's actually from. It's actually from a. It's actually from a local pizzeria. Yeah. I saw this when we were in the restaurant, and I was like, "This is a drinking receptacle with the word big on it," and I just thought it was so on theme. And Crystal Watanabe had actually commented recently on one of the episodes. She said, "How many drinking receptacles do you own? And at any given time, how many are there on the table in front of you?" But in answer to Crystal's questions, many. And I think it should become like a running bit. Like, how many different receptacles and drinks are the guys enjoying? I mean, look at you. Cheers.
And then we just jump in and...
Delicious. Just jump in there, you quench it up, and then, so I've got my coffee chased with big love water.
There you go. How's everybody doing?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm hurting a little bit today. I'm in need of major hydration. I went to an event last night, to a battle of the bands. It was an iHeartRadio event. I love music, right? And I think we've got a very wonderful episode coming up with the fabulous Blake Neely that I'm excited for everyone to see, because you realize how evocative music is. But music, when it didn't really sort of have any place in your emotional life, that's always a strange one. When we were watching Sublime and Green Day, 21 Pilots. But I'm sitting there going, I know these songs, but they don't speak to me.
They don't hit. Yeah.
They don't hit. Yeah. And we're very lucky as actors. We are afforded one of those few careers that allows you, as long as you're sort of okay here, and well, not even that sometimes, but mainly okay here and okay in your body, you can pretty much carry on acting, right?
Sure.
But when a band has a very young feel to it, and they're very revolutionary, and they're very sort of teenage angst, and now they're in their 50s, it's like, come on, guys.
Different.
It hits different. And there was a part of me where I watched the lead singer go down on the floor, and he was doing one of those like playing like with his back on the floor, and then the other guitarist was like walking over the top of him, and in their 20s, that was probably just
looked amazing.
Like archetypal chaos, just amazing. He finished with a really nice iHeart close-up on him with the words,
could he stand up?
And he actually mouthed the words, "I can't get up."
Music, especially that kind of music, rock music, punk and all that, it's and like athletics, like professional athletics, it's a young man's game. Very literally.
Yes. And it's funny you should say that, because I do watch these episodes back, and I think, boy, there was a lot of running. I do remember doing an awful lot of running.
Yeah, we just threw ourselves into it, like reckless abandon. That's
and not a single stretch in sight. We just busted straight into it. I don't think I stretched once as Rigsby. I remember doing a lot of running and in tight suits with with not sensible office shoes.
Yeah, really slippery leather bottom.
Yeah. What was interesting is that we had this with the Dano episode, last episode, where your word, I believe, was wobble. But this is what I love about watching the show, is that you and I have, in the main, I respect your wonderful taste, but we have obviously very different takes on different episodes within the show. And that has been really interesting for me. The episode Bloodshot was interesting and an inflection point for me because of the relationship stuff that it afforded with Van Pelt and Rigsby, but also because it was the first time that I thought we actively removed Jane from that pedestal of he's always right. And we actually begun to question him and begun to sort of take issue. And I like that because it gave us, I think, a little bit of that credibility back.
I didn't disagree with any of that analysis. That part of the analysis I totally agree with. I just said my thoughts were as a whole together.
I think that this is where I found myself with today's episode. And this is a Bruno episode, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, obviously Nothing at all wrong with the writing. Nothing at all wrong with the performances.
Right.
Nothing wrong with Kevin Dowling's direction either. And for me, I think it was more just conceptual. I think the thing that sort of hit me the most about this episode were that there are certain episodes that are standout about the show, and just suddenly they just sort of seem to elevate themselves. I'm thinking off the top of my head, Erica's Red-Handed is a great example of that. That really shot out. This one, in spite of all of its ingredients, just didn't land. It felt a little bit formulaic. A little bit formulaic, this episode. The reason I say that is that I think we have talked at length about how the show has a sort of a class conscience. And I think that what has been a low-hanging fruit, maybe at times something of a class warfare. And I remember Ken reaffirming this, that the easy, especially around that time, I'm thinking around 2008, post-economic crash, I guess the lowest hanging fruit there for popular opinion is to go after the hedge fund, to go after the wealthy investment banker. The money is evil. We had it a little bit in the episode that we actually have coming up, but I don't want to tread on Blake's episode. But for me, thematically, that just sort of defaulted us back to we've seen this before, and some of the characters that featured in today's episode felt very like they were going through the motions.
Yeah.
Very stereotypical. And that surprised me as a Bruno episode, but it also sort of surprised me at this stage in the series. But I do think it speaks to one thing, which is that it's tremendously hard to honor a consistent and exceptional and top-level series narrative over 23 or 24 episodes per season. I think that might be at the root of it. And I remember having conversations with Chris and with Bruno and saying, with all the best will in the world, there are going to be episodes that feel more as if they're I won't say filler, but ones that make... Filler. Right? So, and was that your takeaway from this one? I feel like maybe I'm...
Yeah, I would have to echo those sentiments. I would agree, but just to kind of flip it on its head a little bit, my word, my one word for this episode was this:
heartstring.
Okay, heartstring. Yeah, and I'll just go right into it. I mean, to me, with all of that you had just gotten into with the descriptions and your analysis of it, the end still got me.
Right.
It still got me. It was interesting because it's coming.
What element? What element of the end?
Well, the element of the end where the family gets the money for the treatment.
Sure.
And for some reason that hit me. I was like, wow, okay. And it's coming, right? They set, Bruno sets it up, but there is something, as you pointed out. Nothing wrong with the writing, the acting, everything. And I think that's part of Bruno's, that he's able to mask all of that and make us... He's kind of... what he did for me, at least in this episode, is he said, look at this. He was the mentalist in this episode. Just like we create those comparisons to Patrick Jane. That's what he did with his writing, in my opinion. He said, look over here, look over here, look over here. Meanwhile, he's telling the story over here. And then at the end, he hits you with, okay, the family ends up with the money. And for some reason, and maybe it was a performance thing, the actor that played the lady that had the illness.
The wife.
Skelling's wife. And it just hit me still. They got the money and went, oh, that's great. And it kind of... So for me, that pulling on the heartstring was still effective. Now, from how we got there, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think it was the same stuff. I think also feel.
It's interesting that you mentioned that actual device, because that device more than ever felt like more of a sort of a recyclable, I'm interested to have these bigger conversations. Maybe we'll be lucky enough. I know we were talking about trying to bring on Ashley Gable, Tom St. George, other senior writers, because I think, we've been afforded the opportunity to speak to Erica, to speak to Ken. Hopefully we'll get the opportunity to speak with other writers too. The money thing was an immediate hark back to me of that previous episode where, do you remember there was a lady who had a dying mother? And she she has a briefcase of cash, I think, that she opens up for the mom's treatment. So even that felt like a bit of a rinse and repeat. And I think for me that was
here's my thing. That trope is, we've seen it on a million other shows.
Sure.
But there's a reason why it's a recyclable. It works, you know, at the end of the day, it absolutely works. And yeah, that's where I was kind of coming from with this one.
It's funny. I think obviously you hit on something that's really interesting there. How much people expect a certain something from a certain show, you know? And I think 18 episodes into season 1 on a notable hit show that has been very, very heavily lauded, very heavily talked about, we are in no doubt enjoying the limelight now of a successful hit show. And with that, I'm sure creatively comes pressures, comes the ability to, yes, push the story forward, but also a new pressure to keep giving the audience what they like. That must be hard, and I'm sure that there is an element of that. What I
think it's a
thought,
balance, though, too, right? It's a constant balance of actually, I think, and from what Ken was saying, you know, Bruno's natural reaction is to not
don't give it. Don't give it them.
So, you know, Bruno stays faithful to how he wants to, and I'm just speculating here. I don't want to.
Sure.
You know,
I don't think either of us have the
but
definitive answer until we speak with him. Yeah.
But, you know, it seems like, you know, he tells the stories he wants to tell, and he'll get notes back from the powers that be and make those adjustments and, you know, give the people what they want, like this happy ending at the end where the family gets the money, or you know, the sick wife gets $500,000, and you know, it's a great day, you know. So, you know, I don't mind that, and we also have to consider what we're talking about too, right? I mean, The Mentalist itself, it's not groundbreaking in the sense that it's a police procedural. You know, we tell the story. We've brought up some of the differences as far as Jane, for example, Simon playing him as more of a coward, which is a more interesting choice. The way you play against Rigsby's initial sort of, you know, instead of being a bull,
the heavy
running in there, playing you know, against type a little bit. But at the end of the day, this is a police procedural, and we're on network TV. So I kind of feel like you're going to get those kinds of endings, and they are going to be a rinse and repeat.
I think that, I think those are all great points. And I think, you know, what Bruno ended up very skillfully doing was having to ride that fine line of any popularist piece of art, which is give the audience enough of what they want to keep them coming back, but also maintain the integrity of what you wanted to write. I didn't want to write Jane and Lisbon getting together, but ultimately the pressure was such that I had no choice. And I think that was the sort of the feeling that we've had back from younger writing staff, and certainly interested to have him weigh in. There was something just attitudinally about Jane in this episode that bothered me a little bit. A little bit.
You're just echoing everything I felt about the
Really?
Wobble episode. Yeah, that's
really isn't that funny? So
because
I guess
remember,
it just
on
hit
the
at
Wobble
different
episode, I was talking about Jane being mean at the hospital and
Right.
you know, being
I
a little
remember,
bit of a dandy, and you were like, I can relate to that. That's, you know, like I've been there, and I'm like, no, come on, you know. But you're saying the exact same thing that I said now.
Yeah, and maybe these cumulative sort of builds are just realized at different points within different episodes. So I guess I'm there, maybe an episode behind you. But what is interesting is that there was a certain flippancy when he's like, I got sandwiches, let's go out to the desert, it's nice. For some reason felt, I won't say spiteful, but it got to a point where it was just, I think by episode 18, we've earned a dynamic now with Jane, and that is that he closes cases, so we let him get away with a certain amount of something. We've pushed back occasionally, and we've seen Lisbon lead the charge on that. But every now and again, I do feel as if we sort of run the risk of not taking the case or the team seriously. We are an elite regional crime unit who has been called in, and, you know, there was a moment in the episode that jarred with me a little bit where the head of Carnelian, he said, this is a career-defining case, Agent Lisbon. But it didn't seem to be... it didn't seem to have been operated with a career-defining case.
I didn't get that either.
Very much. It seemed very much like this was a case of the week, but maybe that was deliberate. Maybe the Carnelian guy was like, "Hey, listen, you don't understand how important I am," and Lisbon's check was, "You're just another case to us." Maybe there's a version of that, but for me as a viewer, it was the first time, and again, all of these things are afforded by the context of watching this on a weekly cadence. So, I'm now able to really put myself in the mind of a weekly viewer. And all of these things do build a sort of a new collective consciousness. And it's interesting what you're talking about. What we're both describing is a sort of a cumulative effect where we're feeling the same things at slightly different times in the series. It's just maybe in places a bit familiar.
Right.
My word, funnily enough, was sky. Now, I don't know why I chose the word sky, but I have a very vivid remembrance of this episode. And it was, again, I think afforded by the fact that we had some stills photographers on set. I remember the show being at a point where we were enjoying that hit status because I think we had Entertainment Weekly or TV Guide or someone on set with us when we went out and shot in the desert. And there was, do you remember that moment where we were all out and minus Van Pelt, obviously, poor thing,
in the desert,
being on the computer. Yeah, we're all in the desert. And there's a gag where they do the puff, which is going to be the CGI body that's that drops from the sky. Now, I remember on the day that being a bit chaotic and not really being properly talked through, like where he would be like dropping from. But clearly I was the only one who didn't get the memo because there's a great photograph taken by one of the stills photographers, right? And everyone is like looking down on the ground and I'm like this. So clearly my timing was way off and like I was just looking at a different guy falling out of the plane.
Well, no, you know what? I would write that off to Rigsby was looking ahead and checking to see, is there any other
bodies?
Is there any other dangers coming from above us? Like he's that on top of it. Like,
I love that. Because we always look to Rigsby for the 2 steps ahead answer.
The tactical acumen.
It's like, sure, worry about the body on the floor, but let's just think about the other bodies that might be coming. Yeah,
the 15 other bodies that are going to be dropping.
I mean, that would have been truly horrifying if we had multiple. And that was the other thing. So we have a murder here that is a murderer's accident. So again, that was sort of very corporate espionage. Let it become like something that could be offset as failure onto something that either happened or been set up by another person. It became increasingly hard for me to invest in these guest characters. I didn't really believe any of them, and that was
it takes you out of the episode.
It did a little bit. And I remember when I was filming, I didn't have an awful lot to do in this episode, but I remember thinking, I don't really know who these people are. They seem to form a faceless unit, and maybe that was deliberate. Maybe Carnelian was represented as this sort of
that faceless identity,
faceless executive front who could insert anyone here.
That's a great way of putting it, I think.
And perhaps
it could have
perhaps
been
it is that. Perhaps that's I'm missing the nuance here, and I wouldn't be surprised if Bruno had very deftly made it feel as if because we had a lot of very capable actors there. Patrick's a great actor. Jamie is a wonderful actress. The gentleman who broke his leg, he's a fabulous actor. And then there was the guy who just every time I see he's a wonderful actor. I've seen him in a bunch of stuff.
He's excellent. He's got that voice, that baritone.
They ended up feeling like interchangeably anonymous
I agree.
Identities that it got very, very hard to invest in. And because it was a crime of money, rather than, we talked in a previous episode about that poor woman who lost her kid and that, her daughter, the country club episode. And for the first time, fabulous little twist in the tale from Erica. As an audience, we were like, oh wow, that sucks. But as a parent, I get it. I get that this poor woman was like this person took my baby away. I wanted to do anything that I could. I think it sort of doubled down even more when I found out that it was Randy, I think his name is, right? What's his last name? Randy
Falk.
I'm trying to remember. Falk, thank you. When I found out it was him, it was sort of, well, corporate on corporate
Like,
sabotage.
Is that what it is?
Yeah,
You know?
a little bit,
Yeah.
you know, and I think that
And you know what? I think maybe all of these points that you are bringing up, maybe that's why I settled on Heartstring. Maybe that's it. Maybe because to me, maybe that was the only real thing in there. You know, there's something.
Well, it's interesting that you picked that out, because I thought Lee's wife was a standout and a very tough role to play, because again, we've seen that role a million times. And then just a very difficult beat for an actor to play too, when you have because when the scene started, I was like, there's something really off with her hair. You know what I mean? Like, before I actually knew what was going on, I was like, oh, they did a terrible job on her hair. And then I realized that it was intentionally bad. And again, something of a metaphor for maybe some of the things that we're discussing here, that these things that read either as misreads or as heavy tropes, maybe they're deliberate, because they kind of, they enforce the theme that they're talking about, you know. And I thought she was very, very capable, and that was a really difficult thing to have to do, to take that off, and then to have obviously the fake bald head there, and have that played out with all the sympathy and levity that she managed to command. But again, it was,
and it wasn't, and she didn't, you know, lay in heavy on that. She really underplayed all of that, and that's what kind of lended to her credibility, performance-wise, right? That's why I was
I agree. I agree with that.
Her performance.
Yeah, I agree with that. And
in a span of what? How long was that scene? Maybe 2 minutes. I mean, she did not appear a lot in the episode, and yet by the end of the episode, I was so happy she got the money. You know, it's one of those things, right? She earned it for us as a viewer, right?
And I think that raises a really good point, which is that Chris Long talked to me about this, our executive producer. He said, you know, when you have a hit show and you're lucky enough to have a core cast that has found an audience, the responsibility of the guest actor becomes even more important, because now they are potentially the squeaky wheel. And if you do have a squeaky wheel, a guest actor who maybe isn't quite up to snuff, or just isn't telling the story, that can derail the whole thing. By like token, I think when you have an episode that is, you know, this was fundamentally an episode about money, about economics, about power, a very revisited and hackneyed theme. I thought the one thing that I did like, and maybe these are the more human moments that you and I are gravitating towards, I thought there was a very nice call-out moment between Lisbon and Jane, where she's like, no, I don't trust you. I don't trust you at all. And I thought that was the quiet bit spoken out loud, because up until now, it's been very, very playful between them. Clearly there's flirtation. Clearly there's banter. There's a lot of friendship there. I don't know if either one of them yet would admit in story terms that it was a romantic affection. But I think when you have the kind of conversations that start to talk about intimate personal feelings like trust, you are then bordering on that. And I thought that what Bruno did, and I thought that what Simon and Robin did very deftly and very nicely, was that they managed to maneuver around that in a way that could have been romantic but wasn't. It was like, I'll do a trust fall with you, but it was a very fraternal kind of moment. And then the whole energy of the scene was rescued with her pointing to the Citroen and going, I let you drive me around in this. That's trust.
Yeah.
You know, that's, and anyone who's been in that Citroen
took the tension out of there.
Yeah, we'll know that is a real life trust fall. But for me, if I were to sort of isolate real human moments in this episode, the scene that you described, and then the scene between Jane and Lisbon, I thought was really critical, because I think if there's one thing that we have struggled with Jane, it's that he doesn't appear to want to have that much introspection, because maybe introspection at this... Right. And at this stage, it's too painful. Yeah. Exactly. So I think what happens is that he goes through life doing whatever he's doing with probably scant or little regard for the effects of people around him. And then when those things do backfire, he's actually quite shocked that the people around him might not trust him. It's like, no, of course not. Week in, week out, you're putting us in heinous danger.
You're a liar.
You lied to us repeatedly, but you're just about charming enough to get away with it.
Right.
And it does sort of raise a really, really interesting thing for me. Which I could see very early on how the writers wanted the team to respond to Jane. That became very, very natural and easy for us. So there became an unspoken sort of look between Cho and Rigsby, or a bat of the eyelids between Lisbon and Cho, or Van Pelt and Rigsby both going, what's Jane all about? That became like our go-to.
Language. Yeah.
Our language. But at what point, just to save character credibility, at what point do you turn those little asides into something a bit more on the nose, where you go, you're actually really screwing things up for us, and I hadn't seen any of those moments. And just at the point where I felt like those breaks were coming on episode 16, episode 17 does a sort of complete about face, and then has Jane just being like, I'm going to the desert, having a picnic. I've packed some sandwiches. Let's go see if someone falls out the sky.
What was the comment from the fan in the previous one? I hate to keep going back to the episode.
No, but I think it's relevant. They
said they were kind of put off by Jane's
finding it harder to sympathize with him.
To sympathize, yes.
I talked about it briefly in the last episode too, about how in the flashback Jane was consciously unlikable, and
right.
It's a very, and I have to give major props to Simon for this, because it's a very difficult tightrope to walk, to be a character who is likable enough to become. There is no doubt that Simon's natural charm and charisma were a huge engine for the show and for the role. But what's interesting is that week in, week out, he actually really begins to push the boundaries of how easy it is to like him. How many times have you watched a show and just been moved by a character, right? And it's not necessarily, oh, I love him. I think when people talk about their favorite TV shows, they're like, oh, I love Simon Baker. He's great. There's more than that here. There is nuance. There's humanity. There's times where he's straight unlikable, and yet it's all part of the complex, the conversation we were having last time in Bloodshot. I had an acting teacher, and she used to always reference a wonderful Sam Beckett quote, which was, have you ever failed? Then fail again, fail better. I loved that, because I think that that's a great metaphor for acting. Every take is an opportunity to succeed and or fail, right? Every and this is the beauty of a live medium, is that every single time action rolls around, something great can happen. By like token, something terrible can happen too. But that danger, and I think anyone who's done theater knows that live performance energy is what fuels a great performance. Like you, I have very little regret about anything in this show, about ways I played the character, ways we worked as a team. But if I were to sort of make a more general comment about mediums, one thing you don't get in television is that sense of performance danger. Even in your most sort of, there's moments where you definitely feel like you are surfing a wave.
Sure.
You're like, oh, this scene is going in a place that I didn't, expect it to. This week I did a screen test, a Zoom screen test, which is probably the worst type of screen test you can do. Zoom is just a horrible intermediary that was not designed for. So I just found it to be.
The ideal Zoom audition would be just set up your computer the way that you would set up your self-tape camera, right? Isn't that?
Well, yeah, but here's the problem, right? So when I do my self-tapes, I have Gigi almost always being my off-camera reader.
Yeah,
and I'm very lucky that she's a wonderful, patient, and very capable reader, because
Mhm.
reading is a real skill.
Oh yeah.
Being a good off-camera reader, you want to be
walking in and going, "I love you so much, darling."
exactly.
It's
But
like,
also, you also
come
don't want,
on.
"I love you so much."
Right,
So
that's
it's
the
like
other-
it's such a that's even
that's
I've
worse
been in
almost. Yeah.
I've been in real audition rooms where the reader is auditioning, and I'm like, "Stop auditioning! This is my audition. I don't need you to audition." Like, and so that's really hard. So you've got to be just,
Sure.
not noticeable enough.
Right.
And so, this Zoom thing was very, very weird, because I'm like, I don't know where to look now. But there was something nice and something unexpected about, in the same way that when you make it to set, you've practiced all night and you've run
Mhm,
your idea of how the scene's going to be. And then you get a new actor in who hits you with something totally different. You're like, oh, okay.
I don't remember any of my lines.
Right.
Right,
Well, there is,
right.
that's
That's
reaction
the other
number one.
part.
But reaction number two is, maybe I should recalibrate this now, because
Yeah.
I'm sure you've had experiences like this. There are some actors who just act in a bubble, and
Sure.
they do what I call acting past you. So it's not
Mhm.
acting with you; it's acting sort of. I went to drama school with a few people like this. It's like the acting is amazing, but it's happening
Right
in a
there.
bubble,
Yeah.
and you're like, hello, hi, I'm in the scene with you. Being a guest actor is a tremendously challenging
Oh, it's
job.
tough. It's one of the
And
hardest.
I think it's something that maybe we haven't talked about. And this is probably a good episode to talk about it, because every
You don't
single
know
one of these
anyone.
guests,
Yeah. It's just
every
you're
single one of
coming
these
in.
guest actors are in this episode, for example, have all enjoyed wonderful series regular roles,
Mhm.
are all wonderful characters and actors. And what's interesting is that you come in as a guest, and you usually have 2, maybe 3 days if you're lucky, and you have to bring something that feels like a semblance of a character. And
Right.
if you are lucky enough to be, to have some sort of status or place in the industry after a period of time, maybe you're the killer, or maybe you're
Mhm.
the guy of the week. And then that's a huge amount of emotional character baggage. And then you have to bring all of that in with the same energy and the same lived in quality of these people who have been doing it day in,
Doing
day
that
out
for
for the last, in our,
yeah. Lots of
18
work, yeah.
episodes in our instance. So I always marvel at that. And I think I have a bigger appreciation of that post The Mentalist. I was so young during The Mentalist that I didn't really understand the heavy lift that was required with a guest actor. It's like, come in, don't bump into the furniture, be excellent, and carry an awful lot of very important plot scaffolding with you,
Mhm.
and do all of those things and be seamless, and then die. Or, be the murderer, or whatever it
And then
is. Yeah,
walk away,
that's a
right. Go to
lot.
prison. Yeah,
That is
yeah,
a
right.
lot to do.
Right.
And also come up to speed with all of the foibles and all of the interpersonal politics and what have you that you might
Mhm.
be walking into. For me, this was not so much of a misstep. It was just more of a summation of all the parts. And then for whatever reason, didn't move it forward for me. It was like,
Yeah.
okay, we are in, it's like when you hear a great piece of music and you're like, that's a great piece of music by a band that I love. It's
Mhm.
just, for me, it's not the single. There is so much about this episode that is quintessentially The Mentalist.
Oh, of
And
course.
what is that little something that makes one episode, makes you go, yeah, that's it. And then, other episodes, whether it's 16 for you, 17 for me, give you more pause and go, that didn't quite work, or that
Yeah.
didn't quite come together in the
Mhm.
same way. I'm not quite sure what that is.
I don't either. And maybe some of our viewers, listeners can help us out with that one. How'd you
Can
guys
weigh
feel
in on
about it?
that,
Yeah.
for sure. I
I
also
wanted
want
to mention a couple things here.
Yeah.
Going back to the episode, at the top of the show, and I think it was pretty funny. Lisbon says it's a 3-hour drive to the Mojave Desert, and we don't have that kind of time, and it's going to be boring and all that. It's a 3-hour drive to the Mojave Desert from Los Angeles. It's an 8-hour drive to the Mojave Desert from Sacramento to where we are. So that was a little goof that I thought was kind of
that's
funny that we didn't catch.
That's funny. That was lost on me and lost on the
Yeah, it
network,
was too.
clearly.
Yeah.
That's funny.
And I very much appreciated Cho's line. This is a goat turd about 6 months old.
I love that.
That made me chuckle. So
I love that. That was great because so many of these characters came and went. Like there was an affair picked up with the Sobel character that was then put down. It was then reframed as it's going to be a sexual harassment thing. There was just a lot being packed in there. But also the bomb thing really confused me.
The description by Lee Skelling, that was a lot of exposition during the during the interview with Cho, and he was telling the story about how Carnelian Prime Trust screwed him out of the 50 grand or whatever it was, and it was like, that's an extremely detailed thing of trying to set this up, and it just came off a little bit strange.
Yeah, and I think for me, it almost felt like maybe there was a draft of this that felt much bigger and much more fleshed out, and I think that. Something that we haven't mentioned is that a production draft through to a shooting draft can change dramatically, night and day, right? I know that you and I used to always joke that we would never take the production draft too seriously, and there would always be the draft where you're like, oh, I got this killer monologue. Yeah, that's never going to be in there. Never going to be. Yeah, it's just like Rigsby has his to be or not to be, and by the time we get to the shooting, go done. I was like, oh. Yeah. But there were a lot of things that I just found problematic logic wise, like the cut parachute, right? So it was done randomly. Yeah, he cut the thing, and then what we're saying is that could have been any member of his team then grabbed that parachute, correct? But that's borderline psychopathy because he's having an affair with this woman, right? So you're just saying that he's so evil, this guy, that he doesn't even care if she picks it up, or did I miss a point where that David guy was just
exactly right? Yeah,
that was it, right?
Yeah.
Just going back to the bomb because it does.
Let me do a quick thing about the bomb.
Please.
So I liked it when the bomb tech is explaining the device, right, to Jane. It's in the back of his van.
Yeah, I remember that.
Explaining to Jane in Lisbon.
Was he a real like police guy?
I'm not sure. I don't remember.
There was something about that guy, just the way he was speaking about
he came
explosives.
Off
he had a real
a little bit stilted, but like you're like, oh, okay, he's a real.
He knows
guy.
what he's doing. Yeah, it's either a genius piece of casting or we just happened to have an explosives guy there who's like, okay, I'm a bit awkward on camera, but sure, I can talk to you about.
But he said, why? Like my question was, why would he leave the bomb tech? Why would he leave the bomb one step away from detonating? Right?
Yeah, that was a bit strange when he said, don't touch the red.
Correct. And he says, his line is, even though it's disarmed, you touch the red terminal, we're all barbecued. Doesn't that mean that it's not disarmed?
yeah, that's the very definition of
not disarmed. If
I disarm the bomb, but don't touch that because that will arm.
Because it'll go off. Yeah. So,
okay. Yeah. Again, there were definitely, definitely a few people that missed some of the details. The placement of the Mojave Desert, careless. The arming and yet apparent not disarming of a bomb. Right. It's like, don't worry, guys, it is perfectly safe as long as you don't take that wire and just reconnect it there. That would be awful. Then not really disarmed, is it? Well, no, because what I did was I left an inch between the wires. So as long as that inch remains, disarmed. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, look, I think, and maybe we are probing this too academically, who knows. What I love about the show is that it does hold up to this kind of rigor and analysis. And I think we've often talked about the show being, quote unquote, just a procedural, or, we've often, I think, made that medium seem de rigueur or in some way easier accessible. But the beauty of The Mentalist was that it was a very artfully conceived show. Maybe there's a tonal shift a little bit here. Maybe there are characters that we haven't seen in these worlds doing things that maybe we don't get to do. To Erica's point, I think Mentalist 2026 would see maybe even more of their private life, and we would be probably just as equally invested in Cho the human as Cho the cop. But the fact that we can sit here and actually dissect plot, character, structure as if we are going through a classic, it to me actually really is. And like you, as a language and literature student, it gives me a great kick to be able to, you know, it was something that
hold its feet to the fire a little bit. Yeah, it's great.
Well, yeah, but also just to be able to do something that I love doing, which is to sort of dissect and analyze and critically, you know, not every show that I have done would hold up to that. I think if we were to do a really deep dive into Commando Nanny, the wheels might fall off a little bit there. But this is what separates, I think, our show from being just another police procedural. We have, I think, a series of characters here that are timeless. They will, for better and for worse, be recorded in the annals of television history because they created characters and moments, and that fiction isn't always perfect and it's not fully realized, and it probably can't always stand up to critical analysis. But in the main, I think if there's only one or two wobbles, then we, you know, over 152 episodes, we're in pretty good shape. Yeah. So I think what was interesting is that I came away from this episode no less of an unashamed fan. I'm a fan of the show, you know, and I say that not just because of our participation in it, but because it is, for me, it's what can happen when you make the best possible collaborations.
I knew during it that it was a great show. I have a new appreciation for how great of a show
and I think that's very well said. What's been interesting about seeing streaming is that what we've done is we've convenienced it, we've fast fooded it, we've given you the whole series in one go, we've served it up ready for a binge viewing.
Yeah.
And now it's got people going, oh, you know what I miss?
Right.
I miss that sense of suspension between episodes, or I miss that longer burn of storytelling. When we talk to fans and when we're lucky enough to have these questions on here, I'm aware of what a massive fictional world this has built. And I think for me, remembering back to why I got into this industry, it was always about going into worlds that I could disappear into. I'd go to the cinema, I'd lose myself in that fictional world for an hour and a half. I'm into a TV show because I've bought into the fiction that these people have so brilliantly created and painted for me. And I think if there's one thing that I've loved about TV Police and having, you know, a lot of fun doing this with you, it's to be able to now come and enjoy the show as something I've never been able to enjoy it as before. And that's a viewer. Our rewatch would be very one-sided if it was just you and I talking about, remember that time on set that we did that? It would seem that a lot of people enjoy the podcast, not just for our on-set shenanigans and talking about what we might or might not have done, but the fact that we are able to walk through this now, discover these characters, analyze these characters, bring what we might have known from the inside, but also now be part of this huge fan fiction community that could say, this is this theory. This is this theory.
And talk about
it. And talk about it. 10, 15, 20 years on, the fact that there is still debate about these things, that to me is the proudest feather in my cap.
I recently read that email from Chris Long, how he didn't know if The Mentalist stood the test of time. I can now report that confidently that Chris, it has stood the
It very
test
much
of time.
does. Yeah, I think so too. And I think that there are episodes that will feel more meaningful and maybe more timely. And I think that is probably where this episode sits too. I feel like there was an awful lot of context that we might miss with The Mentalist. There's an awful lot, I'm sure, of economic backdrops. We were in a very strange political and economic time around that time, and our industry was fluctuating a lot too with the writers' strike. So being able to still, 20 years on from when we started, have these kind of conversations where these characters are still impactful and they are still, you know, giving pause for thought and question. That, to me, I think is the litmus test for a great show. Coming up next week, we have what might be one of my favorite episodes, the fabulous Blake Neely, composer extraordinaire, came up under John Williams and Hans Zimmer, and they did all right. He was the incredible composer for The Mentalist and brought us a lot of that Patrick Jane that we've come to know and love. So Blake Neely will be joining us for episode 18, Russet Potatoes. This has been a really, really, as always, fantastic chat with you, Tim. Thank you so much. We really appreciate all of you being here and joining us. And make sure you tune in next week for another installment of the TV Police.
See you then.